We're going to have an interesting conversation in this hour, and our guests are already in the studio. Diana Gichengo is the National Coordinator of the Institute for Social Accountability, TISA, and Sheila Masinde is the Executive Director of Transparency International, Kenya. Both of them fill the hot seats this morning. Karibuni sana, ladies.
Thank you very much, Lou.
This morning, both of you are here, and thank you for being here. There's a conversation you'd like us to have. And so let's give some background to it. We saw in the last couple of weeks that the president nominated outgoing now, at this point, Director of Public Prosecutions, Noordin Haji, in the light of the resignation of General Kameru, or rather the retirement of General Kameru, that who was the director of the National Intelligence Service. And we now see that the name that came up for nomination, a former spy man, a former NIS man, Noordin Haji, then being nominated to be the director of the National Intelligence Service. All right? No big deal. You know, nominates. He needed somebody. There was going to be a space there. And he's well versed in these issues. He's been at the service before, even now being with his stint as the DPP, then now takes over that position. So what's the problem? I guess that's where we are. There's a problem, obviously. Okay?
Yes.
And both of your organizations, TISA, the Institute for Social Accountability, as well as Transparency International, have come together and you're saying, you know what? There's a problem with this appointment, and it is going as far as saying that it is unconstitutional, almost calling it an affront to the Constitution. Why is that? Start with you, Diana.
This is one of those appointments that feel like a contradiction. Okay, because if you recall, is it just last month the president did an interview with members of the fourth estate. And he was asked, the DPP Noordin Haji acknowledged that he was under undue influence. What do you think? And the president says, I think you need to ask him. Okay? There's a problem there, but talk to Noordin. He should be able to answer all these questions. Then within a very short period, already by the time that conversation gets to be part of the things that are being clarified in a presidential address, they are of national interest, okay? And without giving the country any answers and deciding that Noordin should be the one to give all these answers, he goes ahead and nominates him to be the chief spy. Now, we would have celebrated a new trend because chief spies always come from the president's ethnic bedroom. That has been the trend over the years. Okay, if you look at it, all the chief spies come from the president's bedroom. So this would have been progress and a move at creating nationalism in a very, very critical office and showing that we can trust any Kenyan. But the DPP has held the office of Director of Public Prosecution. He was vetted. People gave their views. There have been different views by people in the legal profession and prosecutors. But in particular, last year, after Kenya Kwanza took office, in a public interview, he acknowledged, look, remember the many cases I called all of you members of the fourth estate and wrote on very beautiful blue paper.
Went to court,
okay, and told you we are fixing this country, issues of corruption and so on, murder, some of them really, somebody had a gun on my head and now I have to, I'm back. I now have my head back. The gun has been removed. I have to withdraw them. He acknowledges.
He acknowledges. Beautiful. Sure, he said. I mean, just at that point, he said and interestingly, however you want to decipher this, for every case that he has withdrawn, he said, and not one was it different, lack of evidence then became the reason why it was being withdrawn. That we have found out later on in the game that there has been lack of evidence, and so it was inconclusive. We cannot carry out with this. Please go on.
That's within his mandate, and very many cases are withdrawn. Okay, but he says he commenced the prosecution fully aware, not whether there was evidence or not. He was unduly influenced, and still, as the DPP took the decision to charge malicious, I would put quote unquote maliciously, because then if you know this does not meet the threshold, there's a problem. When he does that and acknowledges, it could be two things. This is a very honest, he's finally decided to be honest and is telling us the truth and doing the right thing by withdrawing. But he has not shown us anything that moving forward we should trust. If there is a knife, okay, behind his back, that he will not do the same thing. There are no safeguards for that. And the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions Act, in Section 4, it clearly states that in prosecuting matters, there must be equity, there must be objectivity, impartiality, it must follow the natural course of justice, there must be public confidence consistently. Now, all the cases that have so far been withdrawn have been linked to people who have now ascended into power under the Kenya Kwanza government. Is that the strongest confidence for Kenyans who are non-aligned, who may be Azimio? And in the midst of all that cloud of doubt, okay, not guilt, doubt, you now decide this is the most suitable person to become our chief spy. An office with higher levels of responsibility, requires higher integrity, but with less public interaction. I just leave it to Kenyans. What are we supposed to think of this particular appointment?
What are we supposed to think, Sheila? I mean, the picture that Dorcas has, that Diana has painted here is that, you know what, you have somebody who seems almost undecided in what he was doing at the office of the DPP. Now you're saying, let's take that indecision and let's elevate it and say, you will sit in this office as the director of the National Intelligence Service, where there is less public interaction, gives you an opportunity to make decisions on your own.
For us, we've been quite clear. If you've read our petition as the National Integrity Alliance, which consists of Transparency International Kenya, TISA, the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and Inuka Kenya, we are a citizen-centered integrity and anti-corruption coalition that's really fighting for the promotion of, rather promoting integrity in this country. And if you look at our petition, we've laid out the grounds under which we are dissatisfied rather with Mr. Noordin's Haji performance at the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions. And we have deeply analyzed. And the reason why this petition is actually coming at this time is because we spent quite a bit of time, the last 8 months, looking at those cases as were being dropped day by day. There are more actually than we've just listed. Actually, we've just listed 7 cases, but there are many more cases because we were looking at the ones where we had information and the ones which are based on corruption and economic crimes, because there are others like murders, as Diana has referenced. And the reason why it took a bit of time is because we also took time to file access to information request to his office, and he wrote back and said, if we want that information on those cases that he has withdrawn, we are free to go to court. So it's been quite a process getting some of those court files, which we are still analyzing. But if you look at the 7 cases that we have listed, it actually leads you to a decision that this is a person who is incompetent. He has not complied to the laws that he should in taking charge and exercising the powers of his office, particularly the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions Act, the Decisions to Charge Guidelines, the Public Officers Ethics Act, the Leadership and Integrity Act as well. And I'll just maybe highlight some of the cases that have led us to this conclusion that and which lay grounds for that is unfit to hold public office and for removal from that particular office, and even unsuitability to take charge of the Director General's Office of the National Intelligence Service. One particular case, if you look at the details, one of Geoffrey Mwangi and the NHIF case particularly. Geoffrey Mwangi applied to the court in July 2022, saying that case should be dropped, that there was insufficient evidence. The Director of Public Prosecutions vehemently held at that time, in July 2022, that he had sufficient evidence to continue with that case.
Yes.
In January 2023, he applies to withdraw that case on the basis that there's insufficient evidence. Mind you, this case has been ongoing for a number of years. You already oppose the accused's application. But then 6 months later, you now agree with him, And then the other matter is, I think there was a Ben Chumo, the Kenya Power case.
Yes.
Which was, I think he was charged in court in 2018. So this case has been there for almost 4 or 5 years, right? 34 witnesses have taken the stand. 34 witnesses. And from these 34 witnesses, you're saying that there's insufficient evidence. 4 years later, there's insufficient evidence to charge, to continue with that case. Most of these people would say are politically exposed, politically connected people. Is that a coincidence? In some of these cases, it is just one person for whom the charges have been withdrawn. So others are still being charged as part of the case, but one person maybe has been exonerated. And then the other matter that is also quite suspect is that in all these cases, there has been, at least as far as we are concerned, there has been no effort to return these files to the investigating agencies to say, look, there is insufficient evidence here. Based on this, could you reinvestigate or reopen this file? When we've tabulated the amounts concerned in all these cases, it's amounting to almost 11.3 billion. And these are just the cases that we have set apart. It could be much more. Now, you have been working in an office, you have been charged with prosecution, and in almost 5 years you're telling us that some of the cases that you have handled amounted to nothing. That if that doesn't demonstrate incompetence and gross misconduct, what does? This guy actually, money spent in terms of
man hours.
Yes, money spent, man hours, not just of the prosecution, but investigators. And we know how long investigations, corruption investigations particularly, take in this country. Some of those cases have been investigated for more than 5 years. Then they have been prosecuted, they've been in court for almost 5 years for the adjudication process. So you've wasted investigation, the time of investigators, prosecutors, and our judges. And what does that mean in terms of access to justice to Kenyans, people who are filing other cases? You clog up our court system with cases which you later withdraw, and that inhibits other Kenyans from accessing justice because, there's a backlog of cases. We need to look at it in the bigger picture and the impact that Haji's actions have had on Kenyans, on our justice system, and on our economy. Imagine 11.3 billion, at a time when we are facing such extreme financial difficulty. And worse is that the president then goes ahead to nominate this person, who I would actually say is responsible now for the loss of all this money. And we've not tabulated all that human and monetary resources that have been spent.
Yes.
Even the time that we are spending here talking about is money lost. Even money for Spice FM. That's your time and money lost talking about this because someone has been unable to exercise their mandate. So we thought that President Ruto, at a time when this country is virtually on its knees, due to the economic crisis, you would consider such things. Is this someone who can be held responsible, for financial resources? You've already overseen further loss because you've not been able to ensure that you win convictions and even institute, recovery, other entities then institute recovery efforts towards all these resources that have been lost. But you now want to put him in charge of the National Intelligence Security Services. If this person could not exercise such independence, and objectivity and impartiality in the exercise of his mandate as DPP, how sure are we that we can entrust him with a position of such significance and sensitivity as the Director General of the National Intelligence Service? That's my question.
Do you understand what you're actually asking? Let me explain to you what I mean. If I'm to take your argument to its logical conclusion, and you're asking the question, can we trust this person with this new job that is at the heart? Because you're talking about intelligence, you're talking about security. You're asking the question then, the appointing authority, can we also trust this person with running this country if these are the decisions that he is making an appointment? Is that what you're asking?
I am basically asking that. And it's not a question we've just asked on Haji's appointment. But then at a time when this country is facing such economic hardship, we have seen these same people that have been exonerated in these corruption cases ending up to take charge of critical executive offices in the country. So in entirety, we are asking, where is merit, in public appointments? Where is a place of merit? Is it just all about tokenism, and political reward, But I think back to the matter on the DPP, our arguments are actually based on constitutional and the legal foundation as laid bare by those laws and sections of the Constitution that we have raised in terms of why in terms of the provisions that he has flouted and why he's unsuitable to continue holding that office or moving on to another office.
I hear what you're saying, but there's something I don't quite understand. The fact that you talk about evidence and you talk about you providing evidence and basing your argument and the position you take on evidence, is it possible, even in the absolute slightest, that it probably was true? Because the DPP doesn't have investigative powers. Investigative powers are in the hands of somebody else. Is it possible that they could have pursued this case? Because the length of time a case takes in court often has to do with just those of you who are legally minded understand how these processes can deliberately be delayed because this happens and somebody postpones and this happens, and somebody who has the means to and understands it can go on for years, and we've seen them going on for years. Is it possible?
He's asking, is it actually possible that there was no evidence?
Yes.
This happened at a time.
Yes.
And this happened at a time whereby the same DPP had gone to court, and members of the bench would ask the DPP, please do not come to court until you have satisfactory evidence that allows us then to now follow in this court process. He did sit here and say the same thing to us. Exactly. That do not come here and waste the court's time if you do not have satisfactory evidence that will carry a case forward in the same period.
Yes.
So the question here is it possible that he would then have brought cases before court for which he did not have, that did not bear the evidentiary threshold that was required for a case to go forward? Diana is wagging her finger.
There is that. But there is also, at the time, whatever it is he had was adequate as far as he could see. And later on, you realize that it was inadequate. Is it possible?
Is it possible, Diana, before we go to the break, is it possible?
For that nuance to actually exist?
But you see, we have the decision to charge guidelines, which actually articulate, what the thresholds in terms of what you need, what a case needs to meet before you take a case to court. You should ensure that the evidence is admissible and it is evidence that can secure a conviction against the person that you're taking to court.
Correct.
So we trust that because he is a professional, he's someone who is experienced. That by the yes, of course, by the time you're taking a matter to court, you've analyzed the evidence that you have, and you've weighed that, against the interests of justice and the public interest.
But I'm asking the question: is it possible that at a later date you can have evidence that is contrary to it, and that forces you to look at this thing and say, no, I made a mistake here? This now nullifies these. What I'm seeing here nullifies what was brought before me. Is it possible?
Professionally, it is possible to make it would be professional misconduct to analyze evidence, then take a decision. Let's remember the powers of the DPP. The DPP has the power to institute all proceedings, all. After they've been investigated, there are very, very many files that came from the DCI which he did not charge. Because ultimately, and if you remember the tug of war that was there between Kinoti and DPP, it was around that. And he was supported that the office of the DPP is the one with the capacity and the clarity to determine the evidence provided. Is it enough to carry this particular charge all the way to prosecution and to a possible conviction? Okay? He was very, very well resourced. In the last 7 years, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution has seen significant improvement in human resource. Where there is any doubt in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, he has the power to order any investigative agency, EACC, DCI, even if it goes to KRA, any investigative agency, to give him more information. Once he has satisfied himself, this is okay, then he proceeds to to court. In a number of these cases, it is where you have had even 30 witnesses give their evidence in court. Okay? Then after such a long hearing, then you have an awakening. There is no evidence.
Inadequate evidence.
This is wrong. We must drop this.
Okay.
Okay? Surely that's very, very problematic, and it questions not just his own capability, but all those very qualified prosecutors that we have at the ODPP.
Precisely.
Okay? So it's a very deep question. And let's come back to the bigger ramification of what Sheila has just said around the withdrawal and then the appointments. What are we losing?
Okay, so we're having a conversation about the cases that were withdrawn by the DPP. We're looking at a situation now whereby the president has now nominated the DPP to be the Director General of the National Intelligence Service. Sheila, you talked about ramifications, and Diana giving way to that as we went to the break. Ramifications of this, we may see it like no big deal, right? Okay, so evidentiary threshold was not met. Cases were withdrawn. What does it look like if we're looking at the bigger picture of the nation here? That the same individual now has been given an opportunity to manage affairs at a place where really nobody asks any questions. What does this mean? On that level, and also on this other level where we're saying, okay, then is it possible? And sorry, I just thought of, what if I have a case in court? I could very easily come to you and say, well, the evidence that you have against me, how do we know that it has met the threshold if we have all these other cases being pulled? What does that mean now for both?
I would just go back to emphasize the point on personal responsibility. And if you look at the various laws that we expect public officers to abide by, with the Public Officers Ethics Act and even the respective laws that set up the various public institutions, there's an underlining on public responsibility, personal responsibility. We expect that state officers will take personal responsibility for failures and successes in their office. But in this regard, it's concerning that for an independent office, this particular individual has failed to take personal responsibility, and we have gone ahead to indicate for these cases that we have listed,
Sheila,
the amount of losses.
Has he failed to take personal responsibility? I'd like to understand.
Personal responsibility, because you were given the responsibility of the mandate, to oversee public prosecutions in this country. You have spent
That
more
is the
than
job.
5 years. You have spent more than 5 years. All we're asking is that you oversee public prosecutions, and you have a team, a big team, with public resources to be able to undertake that role. You have taken cases to court. They have been in the court pipeline for more than 5 years. After 5 years, you decide that all this work that you have done amounts to nothing, because there's no sufficient evidence. You withdraw those cases. We don't see any effort towards taking back those files to the investigative authorities. Rather, as we speak now, we are not sure what is the fate of all those cases that were withdrawn. Ideally, they should have been taken back for investigation, because the fact is that there was a crime that was still committed. So who did it? Shouldn't we then go back to the investigative authorities, because he has the power to direct investigations? That hasn't happened. And that is why, in response even to your earlier question on can someone decide to withdraw a case even at midpoint,
Yes.
Because you realize
Could there be circumstances?
There could be circumstances, yes. But if you fail even to communicate, we have asked that question, and that is why we wrote and asked, please give us the reasons, the grounds under which these cases were removed. He said, go to court if you want that information, if you want those court files. Why can't you, as a public office, just simply explain to the public, these are the specific grounds for removal? You just put a blanket response, insufficient evidence. How do you expect the public to trust that if you're not willing to further explain what do you mean by insufficient evidence, and what measures have you taken to fill up those gaps in evidence by basically then returning those cases? And we've seen before, and you know why, CT, I'm also emphasizing this particular point, is that in many of these cases, and even previously as some of these cases were being investigated, there was a lot of back and forth between the ODPP and the
DCI.
various investigative agencies,
DCI,
whether it is DCI
or
and even
ethics.
EACC.
Yes.
KEMSA case, the COVID-19 KEMSA case, is it now 3 years on? Has never seen the light of day. Why? We've been writing to ask. We even did a petition to the ODPP and asked, where is this case last year? And the feedback we're given is that the case is not strong yet for investigation, and they took back the file, so EACC is still investigating that matter 3 years on. And we said, okay, well and good, let's give you time to investigate if what you're looking for is evidence.
Yep.
In many of these cases, and you remember what the DPP would say, time without number, that I am not going to take a case to court without evidence. Every time he was accused of delaying cases or being the weak link in anti-corruption enforcement, because he said, I will not take a weak case to court. I will take my time to investigate. Isn't it curious that then in these cases he did not take his time to investigate, and you're now remembering 5 years on?
Sheila, you have a very valid point, but you see, I'm looking at it this way. I am thinking, even as you're speaking, of the myriad cases that were handled by the DPP. If we were to talk about averages, these are high-profile cases which involve a lot of money. If we look at just the cases that were prosecuted, if we look at percentages, how many cases, just in terms of cases, not the level of or the intensity or the profile of the case, but just the cases, how many of these actually went to court and were acted upon? If we were to talk about averages and percentages, on average, did the office or the public prosecutor actually do their job? Were cases prosecuted? Apart from these ones, were they well prosecuted of the many cases that went through that office?
As we have said, there are many other cases that they handle.
Very many, actually.
There are very many cases. And it's not just corruption. We know that they do many other cases, murder and other crimes that they handle. Yeah. And I think it's for you to call him and to give you the data that in terms of the success rate of his cases, maybe he'll probably give those numbers at the point of his vetting. But why we are emphasizing on this is the impact that it has in terms of enforcing impunity in this country. Because what we're saying is that you can be accused of a crime, but those cases can be easily withdrawn, because the impression that we get from this, because we've clearly mapped out these cases and where some of these individuals now sit, in Kenya, they are sitting in high executive offices. It is not misguided for us to have then that perception that these were politically connected people, and the time at which these cases were withdrawn is quite curious. Many of these cases were withdrawn just before they were vetted, or just before they were appointed, and even for some, just after they were appointed, So that is why it's so curious. You have to draw those and make those linkages.
I agree with you completely, but I'm simply saying again that in addition to what you're saying, you cannot lump the office of the DPP and the DPP himself and say he's incompetent when these are not the only cases that his office handled. They were high profile, yes. And indeed, everything you say about those cases are true. There are many individuals who had those cases, they were dropped, they were given some really serious appointments. Okay? It is true. But what about the other cases that they prosecuted successsucally?
But City,
are we to judge this particular office just...
City, first is, and I have sat with people from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, including deputy directors. And in certain meetings where they were being held to account by even Parliament, they have said this is a case of personal responsibility.
Okay.
And in particular, because...
Meaning what? When you say personal responsibility?
Because it is the DPP himself who acknowledged that I did this out of other influence. And Section 6 of the ODPP Act requires independence. And is very, very express that all matters and actions taken by DPP shall not have consent of anyone, no authority other than the law. Other than the law. So if you're the leader at that level, you're tainting not only the office, but you must take personal responsibility. And why we are sticking to the leadership and integrity chapter is because you're first appointed on account of your personal integrity.
Diana,
that
I just want to
becomes
clarify.
Tainted in that regard.
Want to
and
clarify.
What we want to rescue is all these other officials and public prosecutors who work hard and deliver on the mandate, but that is being undermined, by this particular blot. It is a blot, but it is a significant blot.
I hear what you're saying, but I want to clarify something, because we're saying something extremely serious here, that he is essentially saying that, according to what you've said now, and then obviously there's going to be need to justify that he said the reason why he held, or rather made this decision, is because he was facing some kind of pressure. There was the proverbial gun to his head. Did he actually say these words?
He did.
On national TV. I hope we can get the clip.
Yes. There's a reason why I'm asking the question.
He did.
Things I may have seen, but I'm asking. There's a reason why I'm asking you to.
I am only quoting what he was aired.
Yes.
On TV by. It was an interview.
I think it was with
Sophie.
Yes.
Sophie Wanuna.
Yeah, it was on KTN.
Okay,
so maybe can I just add something here, based on what you, just the reminder, the national reminder, very key national reminder you have given, is the fact that he, by his own admission, has said that he was under extreme pressure in many of those cases to rush them to court without evidence. And yet, the ODPP Act, the decision to charge guidelines are very clear that before you take a case to court, you must ensure that there's enough evidence that it is admissible and it can stand the test of trial. But other than that, even if you look, and I've mentioned already some specific cases where the manner in which the prosecution was conducted is quite suspect, and which shows that he was under influence and probably not objective. I've talked about the Geoffrey Mwangi case, the NHIF case. There's also the Lenao Kulal case. Remember the Samburu governor case?
Yes.
You remember in that flurry of withdrawals in September, on the day that 3 cases were to be, or had been, there was an application to withdraw cases. There were 3 cases. One of them was a Lenao Kulal case. But then after a lot of hue and cry, what's happening? Why are all these cases collapsing? He changed his mind after 2 days and said, no, we will continue with this case. After making an application to withdraw to saying that there was insufficient evidence. In that case, I think 8 people had already taken the stand. But when you look at specifics in each of these cases, the pattern, the inconsistencies in terms of you make this decision and then goes 2 steps back. And that's why we're saying this is a person who has shown that he can cave under whether it is political or external pressure, but yet that office said that you must act in an objective manner without any direct or control by any external individual or authority.
Surely. This absolutism, where does it exist? I mean, we have very many independent officers in this country. How independent are they really? The moment you have an appointing officer and they appoint you, are you really independent? To be honest, whether it is in the judicial system, whether it is in the police service, our lived experience with independent officers in this country, how independent are they?
But the Chapter 15 of the Constitution provides for those independent offices.
They do.
And they require independence, because without that, then we will never live the dream of this Constitution. And city.
Yes.
We must hold anyone who applies for an independent office, before you apply for it, you must make sure that you're someone who is bold and you're able to stand for the public interest. But for me, if you cannot do those 2 things, if you cannot stand for the public interest, then you have no business applying for a role in an independent office or even sitting in that office. So let us not say because of our setup, our political setup, that
our political reality, Sheila, reality.
It may be political reality, but let's contrast this with what has happened in the last 2 weeks. Certain people, including a principal secretary, have been fired, because of alleged acts of corruption. They are out of office immediately.
Without a thought.
Not a thought. But in addition to this particular appointment of the DPP, and I just want to read the principles of the NIS. It is a service which shall strive to achieve the highest standards of professionalism and discipline amongst its members, prevent corruption, and promote and practice transparency and accountability, comply with constitutional standards of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and train its staff to the highest possible standards of competence and integrity, and respect rights and fundamental freedoms and dignity. Then ensure there is diversity and an equitable Kenya. So that's the office where he's going. The current DPP, if he's vetted and approved, that's the office. And he must go in with integrity. As we do that, as a lawyer, I think to myself, Sheila has already said if the cases were prosecuted, we would have gained 11 billion. Now they have been withdrawn publicly with an explanation signed. There was no evidence. And a media confession, I had undue pressure. All these people are people with public profiles, big public profiles. Then let's decide they get a good lawyer who advises them. You are defamed. Based on the statements we have seen from the office of the DPP, you are defamed. Come claim your damages.
You can go to court to claim. Right.
Claim your damages from Kenyan tax money. The taxpayers are the ones who will need to pay. Remember, these ones in the Ministry of Health have moved away. Now, this is somebody who is ascending to an office, which will be very instrumental if we are to undertake such investigations. And try, and they would be advising, they would be at the center of it. That is why we feel it's very, very problematic for this particular appointment and many other appointments. The nominee for CBK, Thuge, again, was asked to step aside because of corruption. Charges. And you know, the bar for leadership and integrity is not with beyond reasonable doubt. It is with a doubt. With a doubt, refrain. So that when City says there is no confidence, it's because we have allowed it over and over, starting from the political leadership. The the former president, the current president, they always bring us people who are so tainted, okay? And we risk going back to where, like, if you think about the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, you remember previously, in my lessons, I would learn about Bernard Chunga and what would happen when he was the Director of Public Prosecution. You never knew when you were guilty or not guilty, when it was just a political office, an office that is supposed to lead the cause of justice. Surely we must build confidence in the institution.
Very quickly, as the seconds takeaway is, what then does this petition entail, and what do we then expect? It's a conversation we have to keep unpacking, but literally in a few seconds, what does this petition then entail?
This petition, of course, as I said, we've laid clear grounds on the constitutional and legal foundation for this petition on why we hold that Mr. Noordin Haji should be removed from office based on non-compliance to Chapter 6 of the Constitution and various other laws, the ODPP Act, the Public Officers Ethics Act, and the Leadership and Integrity Act, based on gross misconduct, because we've said he's failed to exercise objectivity and impartiality in his role. And also for incompetence, we've laid the grounds on why we feel some of those cases should have been better handled. And based on that, what we have then asked the Public Service Commission is to institute the proceedings to have him removed from office. But other than that, because we know the time is short between the now and when he's expected to be vetted for this appointment to NIS, we have also prepared memoranda to Parliament, to the respective committee, that's the Defense, Intelligence and Foreign Relations Committee, that will be vetting. And we are going to present these issues on his failures in the ODPP, in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions,
to see,
so that this can be considered. But what we are asking the President is rescind this nomination and give us a better candidate. There are many other Kenyans who are competent and have proven themselves. I don't know why we keep on recycling people who have continuously failed to protect the Constitution. This country needs people who can stand for the Constitution. That is what it will take for us to be able to move forward, particularly even in reclaiming our economy.